Hello and welcome to Total Football Analysis. In this tactical analysis, we will reflect on the tactical lessons learned from Lampard's first season as a coach and consider how his philosophy will be applied at Stamford Bridge. Over the course of the 2018-19 season under Frank Lampard, we saw Derby County line up in a 4-3-3 or a variant of that system for the vast majority of the time. 77% of the time last season we saw Derby playing a 4-3-3 of a sort. Only 3% of the time did we see a meaningful divergence from this approach with a back three used. From this statistical evidence, it is clear therefore that Lampard is highly likely to employ the same 4-3-3 at Chelsea. We should at this point clarify the perceived success of Lampard in a season with Derby County. Many neutrals or even interested spectators will point to the presence of Derby in the playoffs after finishing in 6th position and suggest that they had a successful season. The underlying metrics, however, suggest that Derby overperformed based on expected goals and should have finished quite a few places lower in the table. It remains to be seen whether this overperformance was down to luck or coaching from Lampard and his staff. It was evident from the early stages of the season of Derby under Lampard that the young English coach wanted his side to play out from the back. However, despite having players capable of playing progressive passes through the thirds, they were still passive in their attempts to move the ball forward into advanced positions. In this example, we see Derby in possession of the ball with a line of 4 defenders spread out across the width of the pitch. Even against a team like Norwich, who are in this image in a passive and relatively deep block, there seemed little focus from Derby in playing into spaces centrally. In the 4-3-3, Lampard does play with a single pivot at the base of the midfield, although this player tends to be a largely defensive player and not a passer like Jorginho at Chelsea. As such, the focus of the attacks in the first instance tends to be the wide areas. By progressing the ball in the first instance into the wide areas, Derby all but bypass the single pivot and rely on the two more advanced midfield players and the wide forwards to create space in the final third to allow the ball to be moved up the pitch. This tends to lead, however, to the two wide forwards sitting in narrow spaces and congesting the space that would be open. Here you can see again that the ball is with one of the back four, and despite having space in which to advance, the player in possession remains passive. With the right forward for Derby preferring to drop into a more narrow position in the half space, the width then has to be provided by the fullback. The right back should look to move to a higher line. Instead, there seemed to be an unwillingness from Derby to progress the ball with any urgency. This was a common theme throughout the season. The more advanced midfielders do make vertical runs in order to occupy advanced pockets of space, but these runs are not necessarily easily accessed by a single pass. Ideally, this space would be found by passing to a more advanced player in the first instance, who could then play the ball into the running midfielder. There's of course nothing at all wrong with sides who have their two wide forwards in a 4-3-3 drop narrow in possession of the ball. Often we will see sides do this in order to occupy the half spaces and have their dangerous forward players in pockets of space in the final third. We can expect to see the Chelsea wide forwards move into these areas often when Lampard is in charge. We see in this example that the front three are extremely narrow as Derby look to access the final third. Even behind the front line, however, we see Derby taking up compact positions. These small spaces between teammates allow the ball to be cycled quickly and safely and mean that should the opposition win the ball back, Derby can counterpress in order to win back the ball quickly. It also means though that should Derby look to switch the ball out to the other side, then they do not have the players in position to allow this pass to be made. This also has an effect on the defensive structure of the opposition. If Derby had a player out on the far side of the pitch, then the opposition would have to account for this, and therefore the defensive structure would be stretched. This, in turn, would create the space that Derby would be able to play through. Another recurring aspect of attacking play from Derby County was the willingness and apparent freedom that the attacking players had to shoot from significant range. Let's take two players as a case in point. Over the course of last season, we saw the Welsh international Tom Lawrence score 10 goals from an expected goals value of 5.92. This shows that Lawrence overperformed his expected goals by more than 4 goals. When we look at his shot map for the season, the reason for this becomes clear. Positionally, we see that Lawrence shot from almost anywhere across the width of the penalty area. This is not surprising given that we have already seen that the front three for Derby remained relatively narrow. Time after time, however, possession in dangerous areas was wasted for Derby as their attacking players tried to shoot from range. The same can be said of the young Welsh winger Harry Wilson, who operated from the right of the attack. Wilson ended the full season with an extremely impressive 21 goals from 12.43 expected goals. He therefore outperformed his expected goals by more than 8 goals. Once again, we can see why in his shot chart. Wilson was more likely to stay on the right hand side, although once again we see that he was willing to shoot from significant range. It would be interesting to see what could be achieved through Lampard's tactical system if the English coach encouraged his forward players to be more selective in their shooting. If the attacking structure that we saw from Derby under Lampard was inefficient, then the same could not be said of the defensive structure. The 4-3-3 system very quickly becomes a 4-5-1 when Derby were out of possession with the two advanced midfielders dropping back to the same line as the deeper midfielder in order to deny the opposition space in the central areas. Under Lampard, Derby did not press aggressively, although Wisecout lists their passes per defensive action as a league average 8.51. This means that, as an average, Derby allowed their opponents to make 8.41 passes before pressing them and triggering a defensive action. When out of possession, in the first instance, Derby would look to prevent their opponents from accessing central areas of the pitch. This means that structures, as we can see, were relatively common, with the positioning of the defensive players effectively funneling the opposition down the wide area. We see a similar situation here, as the opposition are threatening to break through in the final third. The defensive block for Derby remains relatively compact, and the opposition are almost encouraged to attack down the wide areas. In a 4-3-3, we would expect to see Chelsea line up under Lampard like this. Kovacic's loan has been made permanent by Chelsea a few days ago. The main talking point will be the move of the French midfielder N'Golo Kanté back to his position at the base of the midfield. We would also expect to see the likes of Mason Mount, Reece James and Callum Hudson-Odoi given a significant increase in first team minutes. It is possible that the recruitment of Lampard as the coach will provide the cultural change at Chelsea to allow them to play more young players from their excellent academy. To conclude, Frank Lampard is an intelligent and well-spoken man who understands football, having played at the highest level. He has also shown a willingness to learn as a coach and took steps on his appointment at Derby to surround himself with excellent coaches. If nothing else, the appointment of Lampard will make the Premier League a more interesting place next season.